The air over Normandy, June 1944. Not the thunder of heavy artillery, but the terrifying whistle of descending steel. The German Fallschirmjäger, the Green Devils, dropping onto the French countryside. These were not just soldiers. They were the Reich's finest, hardened by years of brutal conflict, armed with a philosophy of tactical superiority and a revolutionary weapon. Among them, a limited but fearsome rifle, the FG42, the Fallschirmjägergewehr 42. It was a weapon designed to be the ultimate fusion of combat roles. A powerful, long-barreled rifle, an accurate sniper weapon, and a selective fire light machine gun. It was, in the minds of its brilliant but constrained designers, the pinnacle of infantry design, light, aggressive, and chambered in the ferocious 7.92 2mm Mauser. The German High Command believed this seamless integration of firepower and mobility would shatter the static lines of the Allied invaders, proving once again that German technological genius would prevail over brute force. What they did not know, what this elite force would soon learn with a sickening dread that chilled them deeper than the Norman fog, was that the future of infantry combat was not in the clever, specialized elegance of a rifle, however brilliant, but in the brutal, unrelenting industrial volume of a seemingly obsolete American design, the M1919 Browning medium machine gun. This is the central irony of the conflict, a contradiction that history often overlooks. Germany's machine gun philosophy was one of velocity and innovation. Their MG-34 and the later, more infamous MG-42, the Hitler's buzzsaw, were miracles of rapid-fire engineering designed to dominate the battlefield with a cyclical rate of fire that sounded to the Allied ear like a giant sheet of cloth being torn apart at supersonic speed. They were Einheitsmaschinengewehre, universal weapons of frightening complexity and speed. The American response, designed by the immortal John Moses Browning, was the M1919. A relic of the First World War, it was an air-cooled version of the water-cooled M1917, heavy, requiring a crew, and demanding a dedicated tripod. The M1919A4 alone weighed nearly 31 pounds, 14 kilograms, and its tripod added another 14 pounds, 6.3 kilograms. It fired at a comparatively slow, measured, almost pedestrian rate, typically around 400 to 550 rounds per minute. To the German Fallschirmjäger, accustomed to the frightening blur of their own GPMGs, the American M1919 must have seemed like a piece of clumsy, antiquated junk, a museum exhibit dragged onto the field of modern warfare. Yet, in the tight, unforgiving terrain of the European theater, this inelegant beast would prove to be the single most devastating weapon on the battlefield, not through speed, but through sustained, non-stop, unblinking lethality. The genius of John Moses Browning's original design was not in its finesse, but its utter, unquestioning indestructibility. The simplicity of its mechanism, a basic short recoil operation, meant fewer parts subject to failure. One American ordnance engineer, observing the chaos of the production line in a General Motors plant in 1943, once mused, "We built that thing to run forever." It had fewer parts than the Garand, and the barrel was thick enough to absorb more heat than any man could survive next to. They complained it was heavy. I told them, "Heavy is reliable. Heavy is the difference between 100 rounds and 10,000 rounds fired in a day. You can't put a price on knowing that when you pull the trigger, the damn thing will keep going until the belt runs out." The M1919 was belt-fed, consuming the powerful long-range American .30-06 Springfield cartridge. Crucially, the Allied industrial machine was churning out this medium machine gun in staggering quantities. The goal was simple: fire superiority through density. By 1944, every U.S. infantry company deployed with an almost unprecedented saturation of automatic firepower, all centered around the rugged, dependable M1919. It was a heavy anchor of fire, designed to sit down and literally erase terrain with fire, allowing American riflemen armed with the semi-automatic M1 Garand to maneuver. The M1919 was not a light skirmisher. It was a mobile artillery piece, pouring fire into fixed positions until they simply ceased to exist, burying the enemy under a constant, psychological storm of lead. The stage is set for the inevitable collision. The Fallschirmjäger had the technological edge with the FG42, a rifle that promised the firepower of a machine gun in the hands of a single elite man. The Americans had the relentless, unglamorous volume of the M1919. This was a battle between genius design and overwhelming production. In the hedgerows of the Norman bocage, the sound of the American .30 caliber would soon replace the German buzzsaw as the ultimate definition of fear. This disparity, this overwhelming gap in available sustained automatic fire, would become the single greatest strategic vulnerability for the German elite, turning the war for them from a sophisticated dance of tactical superiority into a desperate, bloody contest of attrition. This story is a testament to the fact that on the modern battlefield, quantity often possesses a quality all its own, a quality that no amount of engineering brilliance can negate. The seemingly clumsy American weapon was not just participating in the fight, it was the mechanism by which the entire nature of the ground war was being fundamentally rewritten. July 1944. The bocage, an unforgiving landscape of thick, earthen hedgerows, high banks, sunken lanes and stone walls. Visibility was measured in yards, and the enemy could be anywhere. This was the perfect arena for the tactical masters of the Fallschirmjäger. They were experts in concealed positions, in devastating short-burst assaults, and in using the element of surprise to paralyze a larger foe. Their most innovative weapon, the FG42, was specifically designed for this environment. It was built for the airborne soldier, light enough to jump with, capable of fully automatic fire at a rate of around 900 rounds per minute from its top-loading 20-round box magazine. For a brief, intoxicating period, the Fallschirmjäger believed they could hold the line, leveraging mobility and the sheer concentrated power of their advanced rifle to beat back the advancing American infantry. But the FG42 carried an inherent fatal flaw, a vulnerability that was logistical as much as mechanical, its scarcity and its crippling appetite. It was produced in painfully limited numbers, estimates suggest as few as 7,000 for the entire war, possibly fewer actual combat deployments, and its role as a specialized paradrop weapon meant that, logistically, it was an immense burden. The small side-mounted magazine was perfect for firing from a prone position, keeping the profile low, but it emptied in barely a second of sustained automatic fire, the recoil from the powerful 7.92mm round, while mitigated by an excellent muzzle brake, made controlled bursts difficult, especially for an individual soldier. A Fallschirmjäger sergeant, captured later in Normandy, recalled the frustrating reality. The FG42 was a gift from the gods. In the first moments of contact, a single man could cut down a squad of advancing Americans, but then you stop. You change the magazine, and the sound of the American fire never stopped. It was endless. They did not move. They simply fired until everything in front of them was broken. We were reloading while they were still shooting. This relentless, unceasing sound was the M1919. Unlike the German doctrine, which typically centered the entire squad around a single, highly stressed MG42, the American squad did not have a single focal point of fire. They had points of overwhelming saturation. The M1919, heavy and awkward to shift quickly, was nonetheless the correct answer to the bocage. Its weight, previously considered a hindrance, became its saving grace, providing a stable platform for sustained, continuous, hours-long fire. The M1919 was not meant to move often. It was meant to hold its ground and drown the enemy in brass. The M1919's relatively slower rate of fire, ranging from 400 to 550 rounds per minute, depending on the buffer, was paradoxically its strategic genius. Firing at this controllable rate, it was incredibly economical with its heat. Its thick barrel and robust closed-bolt operation meant that a skilled crew of two, a gunner and an assistant, could lay down hours of fire with minimal risk of overheating or a catastrophic runaway event, simply requiring a barrel change after several thousand rounds. Crucially, the ammunition was fed via 100 or 250 round cloth or metal disintegrating link belts, allowing the gunner and his assistant to maintain a virtual river of lead directed at the German positions with a simplicity the FG42's small magazine could never match. Against this deluge, the German FG42, designed for an elegant short-duration offensive engagement, was forced into a battle of attrition it was neither designed nor supplied to win. The Fallschirmjäger would fire their 20 rounds, silencing a momentary threat, and then be pinned instantly by the arrival of a 1,000-round counter-barrage from an unseen M1919 position. The sound was not the frantic, high-pitched tear of the FG42, but a rhythmic, methodical, and psychologically devastating thump, 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 a sound that spoke not of speed, but of absolute, inexorable supply. For the American soldier, the M1919 was not just a weapon, it was their shield, their anchor. It was a commitment, a piece of small unit artillery. Private Frank J. Chi, an M1919 gunner in the 35th Infantry Division, later recounted, "When you heard the German sewing machine, FG42, you knew you had about 5 seconds to get down and pray. When you heard the 30 cal start, you knew you could breathe. We didn't move much. We'd find a good spot, zero the sights to 800 yards, and just start feeding the belt." It wasn't about aiming at one man. It was about taking a section of that hedgerow and making sure nothing could live in it. It was like hosing down a concrete wall until it crumbled. The Germans had great guns, but we had the supply line. That's the difference. The battle for the bocage was won by volume. The M1919 did not just kill the Fallschirmjäger, it destroyed their fighting space. It pinned down their movements, prevented their officers from giving coordinated orders, and forced them to consume their finite, irreplaceable ammunition reserves. The elite soldier, armed with the most advanced rifle in the world, was rendered completely ineffective by a heavy, reliable machine that never seemed to run out of bullets. The ironic transformation had begun. The elegant innovation was being overwhelmed by the brute force of industrial reliability. The FG42 was a scalpel, the M1919 was a jackhammer, and in the mud and blood of the Western Front, the hammer was king. The winter of 1944, the Ardennes forest. This vast, silent, and bitterly cold landscape was the ultimate grueling test of the M1919's rugged reliability and the final desperate gamble of the German Fallschirmjäger. The Battle of the Bulge saw the elite paratroopers thrown into a massive surprise counter-offensive. They were moving quickly, traversing unforgiving, frozen terrain, often facing ill-equipped or shocked American units. This, yet again, should have been the perfect stage for the light, powerful FG42, emphasizing the mobility and punch of the German Stoßtrupp, shock troop tactics. Their entire doctrine was built on rapid infiltration and disrupting the enemy's chain of command. But the freezing temperatures and the brutal logistics of deep winter exposed the inherent fragility of specialized low-tolerance weapons. The Fallschirmjäger found that their complex, highly engineered firearms, including the intricate mechanisms of the FG42, were prone to stoppages when exposed to deep cold frozen lubricants and the fine dust of snow. The powerful recoil impulse of the FG42 in full auto fire also made it prone to fouling faster than a typical rifle. Every minute spent clearing a jam, replacing a broken part, or simply waiting for the weapon to cycle correctly was a minute stolen by the enemy, a tactical opportunity lost forever. Contrast this with the M1919, a closed-bolt, heavy, fundamentally basic mechanism, largely immune to minor environmental contamination. Its very simplicity, its industrial coarseness, was its greatest strength in the extreme cold. It was, in a word, tractor-like. It just worked, provided the crew could keep the lubricant thin enough and the belts clear of ice. General George S. Patton, a famously pragmatic commander, summarized the American attitude toward combat technology. "We don't need jewelry on the battlefield. We need steel that performs the same on a summer beach as it does on a frozen hellscape. The M1919 is heavy, the M1919 is ugly, but the M1919 has no temperamental moods. It is simply brutally consistent. Consistency wins the war, not cleverness." The German offensive, initially successful due to surprise and extreme weather, soon stalled and devolved into a series of desperate defensive stands and counterattacks against organized, dug-in American positions. This is where the M1919 cemented its dominance as a defensive powerhouse. The FG42 was an offensive weapon designed to clear a drop zone and capture an objective. When the Fallschirmjäger were forced to dig in, often under hasty, heavy fire, the rifle's small 20-round magazine capacity coupled with the impossibility of rapid barrel change for prolonged fire, rendered it tactically irrelevant against the sheer volume the Americans could deliver. The American soldier, however, was now digging his M1919A4 tripod firmly into the frozen ground, often using the heavy weapon as a core around which to build a formidable defensive perimeter. His firepower was not limited by a 20-round box magazine, but by the size of his ammunition pile and the dedication of his two-man crew. An M1919 crew with adequate supply and a working schedule could expend 10,000 rounds in a single day, a figure representing a staggering 500 magazines worth of FG42 fire, an utterly unachievable output for the German elite under combat conditions. The fear factor shifted completely. Earlier in the war, the rapid, high-pitched tear of the German MG42 was the signature sound of panic for the Allies. By the bulge, the American .30 caliber had become the relentless sound of suffocation for the Fallschirmjäger. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise of destruction, a machine that simply refused to stop firing. The terror was palpable, even across the lines. A German Fallschirmjäger radio intercept transcript from the Ardennes in December 1944 perfectly captured this shift in perception. They don't stop. They don't have to aim. Just the crushing weight of it. Our position is unrecoverable. Request immediate withdrawal. My Gewehr is useless against their endless storm of lead. The endless storm referred specifically to the M1919's belt-fed continuous fire. Furthermore, the M1919, firing the powerful, high-velocity 30-06 round, was also tactically superior in the long, open fields and fire lanes that characterized key bulge engagements. The German 7.92 mm Kurz round, used in specialized weapons like the STG-44 and the design philosophy that influenced the FG42, was optimized for shorter ranges, sacrificing long-range performance for controllability. The M1919 could effectively suppress the enemy at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, 914 meters, turning any attempt at German maneuver into an act of mass suicide. The highly specialized FG42 was outranged, outgunned, and ultimately neutralized by the universal, durable, and immensely powerful M1919. The elite Fallschirmjäger were stunned, not by any single marvel of engineering, but by the relentless, overwhelming might of American industrial capacity and engineering realism. To truly understand the M1919's victory over the FG42's philosophy, we must step away from the frozen foxholes and enter the humming, sprawling factories of the American war machine. The M1919 was not just a weapon, it was a mass-produced commodity, a standardized tool of war. This is where the contrast with German engineering, focused on complexity and perfection, becomes not just a gap, but a colossal chasm. The FG42 was a beautifully complex piece of stamping and machining, a triumph of metalworking, involving dozens of intricate, specific parts. It required skilled, non-transferable labor and utilized scarce, strategic alloys, ultimately limiting its production to mere thousands. It was an expensive weapon in terms of both time and material, one that the German war economy, under relentless bombing and constant resource drain, could ill afford to produce in meaningful numbers. The M1919, in contrast, was a testament to the genius of simplicity, ruggedness, and interchangeability. It was a robust, heavily built design, easy to mass-produce across a vast, diversified network of American manufacturers, from the giant inland division of General Motors to smaller contractors. The statistics tell the definitive story of scale, the difference between artisan manufacturing and industrial engineering. By the end of the war, the Allies had manufactured well over 400,000 M1919 machine guns in all variants, not including the countless fixed-mount M2 and M3 versions on tanks and aircraft. For every single FG42 produced, the United States was building approximately 57 M1919s. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a firepower tidal wave, an overwhelming deluge designed to wash away all opposition. A factory manager at the Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors in 1943 articulated this strategic focus. We simplified the drawings. We used the same heavy steel we used for truck axles. We taught men and women who had never touched a lathe in their lives to assemble it perfectly. not through artistry, but through repetition and clear tolerances. Our objective wasn't perfect. Our objective was functional, fast and final. When we shipped one boxcar of M1919s to the ETO, we knew we were giving the boys enough firepower for a week of continuous fighting. That was our weapon, the assembly line. That was our strategy. The M1919 enabled the American tactical doctrine, fire superiority through sheer quantity of fire. The battlefield philosophy was simple and brutal. If the enemy is pinned down and cannot lift his head, he cannot fight, and he certainly cannot maneuver. The expense of the ammunition was irrelevant to the US military, which had a virtually inexhaustible supply chain and the logistical tonnage to move it. The German Fallschirmjäger, in contrast, were hampered not only by the scarcity of their specialized FG42, but by the crippling shortage of their own standard machine guns, MG42-34, and even their rifle ammunition. Every bullet fired by a German soldier in late 1944 was an accounting choice. Every burst from an M1919 was an act of tactical abundance. The American soldier was taught that if they encountered heavy resistance, the immediate answer was saturation. The M1919 provided that saturating fire. It meant that every American platoon had the ability to deploy the firepower equivalent of a German company's worth of automatic fire. The consequence was devastating for the elite German paratroopers. The initial shock of American presence quickly gave way to the realization that they were fighting not just a numerically superior foe, but an enemy whose weapon systems were fundamentally designed for an attrition war that the Reich, starved of oil, labor and materials, could never win. The FG42 remains a design marvel, an intellectual masterpiece of the German Wehrmacht. But it was an answer to the wrong question. It was a perfect weapon for an imaginary war of fast, fluid, small unit breakthroughs where logistics were assumed. The actual war was a grinding, brutal slugfest fought in the mud and the snow, a war where the simple, heavy, and reliably mass-produced M1919 held all the strategic cards. A German weapons designer, reflecting post-war, admitted the fatal flaw. We were obsessed with the idea of a perfect weapon, a singular solution. The Americans, they were obsessed with a perfect system. Our FG42 was art. Their M1919 was a heavy hammer. They built 1 million hammers. We built 7,000 works of art. The hammer always wins a war of demolition. The M1919 was the ultimate expression of the United States industrial power, a reliable, common weapon that, when combined with unlimited ammunition and a sound tactical doctrine, proved overwhelmingly superior to the most esoteric and advanced designs the enemy could muster. It was the weapon that transformed American industry into battlefield supremacy. The war drew to a close not with a single dramatic invention, but with the systemic collapse of German resistance under the crushing, unrelenting weight of Allied production and superior, reliable logistics. The M1919 Browning, often overshadowed in history books by the M1 Garand or the fearsome German MG42, was in fact the unsung anchor of American infantry dominance in the European theater of operations. It was the weapon that allowed the others to succeed. The final irony is that the M1919, the obsolete workhorse, outlived and ultimately inspired the very designs intended to replace it. The German MG42 and the FG42, while aesthetically and theoretically brilliant, were strategic dead ends for their time, constrained by complexity and cost. The M1919, however, continued to serve for decades. It was a primary crew-served weapon in the Korean War, a vehicle-mounted mainstay in Vietnam, and its design concepts informed and influenced the creation of the ubiquitous M60 GPMG, the American military's next general-purpose machine gun. It became the foundation for a new generation of American firepower. The arc of the M1919 is a story of transformation through function. It began the war as a heavy, perhaps unloved infantry support weapon, a hand-me-down from a previous conflict. It ended the war as the de facto standard for sustained fire across the globe, having proven conclusively that in ground combat, the ability to put an endless volume of accurate fire downrange, reliably and consistently, trumps any singular ergonomic or technical innovation A modern military analyst, assessing the lessons of World War II weapons systems, put the M1919's place in history into sharp focus. The M1919 taught the world a lesson in asymmetry. The German Fallschirmjäger had the best individual fighting rifle in the FG42. It was the future, but it was limited to the extreme. The Americans had a weapons system built around the M1919. They could fire for a week and then fight for another. That difference wasn't about the gun's mechanism, it was about the nation that built it. The M1919's real power rating wasn't its muzzle velocity, it was the gross national product of the United States, converted into relentless, suppressive firepower. The Fallschirmjäger were the last of the elite shock troops who truly believed sheer skill, training, and superior individual weaponry could defeat the overwhelming power of the industrial state. Their initial laughter at the sight of the clumsy, heavy American machine gun turned quickly to terror as they were pinned, broken, and ultimately defeated by the relentless, monotonous thump, thump, thump of the M1919's belt-fed stream of lead. The M1919, then, is not a tale of a wonder weapon, but of dependability, industrial genius, and ruthless effectiveness. It is the story of how an inelegant beast, forged in the heat of the factory floor and fed by an endless supply line, became the devastating counterpunch that stunned and silenced the best troops and most advanced rifles the Third Reich could throw at it. The echoes of its methodical, determined fire remain the true sound of American victory in the European mud. A quiet, steady reminder that volume and consistency often decide the fate of armies.